In April 1973, a telephone rang inside the Santa Cruz Police Department. The caller was more than 1,000 miles away, standing near a payphone in Pueblo, Colorado. His voice was controlled. He said he wanted to confess to murder. The officers who first received the call did not immediately believe him. They knew the caller as Big Ed, a large, talkative young man who spent time around places frequented by local police officers. They thought he might be playing some kind of disturbing joke. So the caller telephoned again. This time, he asked for an officer who knew him personally. Then he began describing details that only the person responsible could have known. His name was Edmund Kemper III. By the end of the conversation, police were confronting a truth that seemed almost impossible. The calm, cooperative man they had spoken with socially had murdered 6 young women, his mother, and one of her closest friends. Years earlier, when he was only 15, he had also killed both of his paternal grandparents. But Kemper's confession did more than solve a series of disappearances. It exposed how a convicted juvenile killer had been released, had passed through psychiatric supervision, and had then lived among the very officers investigating some of his crimes. It also forced Santa Cruz to confront one of the most disturbing questions in its history. How had someone with such a violent past appeared so calm, ordinary, and trustworthy? In the early 1970s, Santa Cruz was a coastal California community associated with beaches, redwood forests, university life, and the social changes spreading across the state. The University of California, Santa Cruz, had opened only a few years earlier. Its buildings were separated across a wooded hillside campus, and hitchhiking was a visible part of student transportation culture. Young people commonly accepted rides from strangers, particularly when moving between the campus, nearby towns, and the highways leading toward the Bay Area. A stranger offering a ride was not automatically treated as a threat. That trust would become one of Kemper's greatest advantages. Yet beneath Santa Cruz's peaceful reputation, the region was entering an extraordinary period of violence. In October 1970, John Linley Frazier murdered 5 members of the Ota household and set fire to their home. Beginning in October 1972, another killer, Herbert Mullen, murdered 13 people in and around Santa Cruz County. At the same time, young women were disappearing after entering cars. The victims did not all vanish from the same place. Their remains were not always recovered together. Different police departments handled different missing person reports. Investigators were also dealing with crimes committed by more than one offender. Newspapers eventually repeated a grim description of Santa Cruz as the murder capital of the world. Whether or not the phrase was statistically precise, it reflected the fear residents felt as unrelated murders accumulated across the county. Among the residents watching the investigations was Edmund Kemper. He was not an unknown outsider. He was a young man with a documented history of killing. Edmund Kemper was born in Burbank, California, on December 18, 1948. His parents' marriage ended while he was a child, and he later lived with his mother and sisters in Montana. Accounts of his childhood describe a deeply troubled family environment, disturbing violent fantasies, and increasing conflict between Kemper and his mother, Clarnell. However, childhood conflict alone does not explain or excuse what followed. Many people experience unstable or abusive homes without becoming violent criminals. The first indisputable warning came in 1964. At 15, Kemper was living with his paternal grandparents at their rural property near North Fork, California. On August 27th, he shot and killed his grandmother, Maud Kemper. When his grandfather, Edmund Kemper Sr., returned home, the teenager killed him as well. Kemper did not disappear or create a complicated cover story. He contacted his mother, and authorities were notified. He was taken into custody and committed through California's juvenile system to Atascadero State Hospital, a secure psychiatric institution. Atascadero's staff were now responsible for evaluating a teenager who had killed 2 members of his family. Kemper was intelligent, articulate, and capable of behaving cooperatively in a controlled environment. He learned how the institution operated and became familiar with psychiatric tests and the language used by clinicians. To hospital personnel, good behavior suggested progress. But good behavior inside a secure institution did not necessarily reveal what he might do when restrictions were removed. After approximately 5 years, evaluators concluded that he could be released. On December 18, 1969, his 21st birthday, Kemper left the institution under parole supervision. The release placed him back in the care of his mother. By then, Clarnell was living in Aptos, a community near Santa Cruz, and working in an administrative position connected to the University of California, Santa Cruz. The arrangement returned Kemper to a relationship that remained angry and unstable. Yet to the people who encountered him outside the home, he could appear entirely different. Kemper was impossible to overlook physically. As an adult, he stood approximately 6 feet 9 inches tall and was commonly known as Big Ed. Despite his size, people often described him as controlled, polite, and conversational. He worked at several jobs, including employment connected to California's highway department. He drove through the region regularly and learned its roads, isolated turnoffs, wooded areas, and mountain routes. He also wanted to be accepted by police officers. Although he never became an officer, he spent time in bars and restaurants frequented by law enforcement personnel. He listened to police conversations, asked questions, and presented himself as a harmless admirer of their work. Some officers knew about his size and personality without knowing the full significance of his juvenile record. Others simply regarded him as a familiar local character. He was able to speak calmly about crime while concealing that he was preparing to commit it. Kemper began picking up female hitchhikers. He did not attack every passenger. According to his later statements, he first gave rides to many young women, studying how they behaved, where they waited, what made them suspicious, and what caused them to feel safe. That process allowed him to refine a trustworthy appearance. He could discuss local roads. He could act helpful. A university parking sticker associated with his mother's employment could make him appear connected to the campus. The young women entering his car could not see his criminal history. They saw a driver offering them a ride. On May 7, 1972, Fresno State students Marianne Pesce and Anita Lucchesa were hitchhiking from Berkeley toward Stanford University. Kemper stopped and offered to take them. Instead of delivering them to their destination, he drove them into an isolated area. There, he restrained and killed both young women. He transported their bodies away from the scene and later dismembered them. Their remains were disposed of in rural areas around the Santa Cruz Mountains. The details of his actions after their deaths were deeply disturbing, but they are not necessary to understand the central failure of the case. 2 students disappeared after accepting what appeared to be an ordinary ride, and investigators had no immediate way to identify the driver. For their families, Marianne and Anita were missing young women. For Kemper, the absence of an arrest confirmed that he could continue. Months passed. Some remains connected to the disappearances were eventually discovered, but they did not immediately lead investigators to Kemper. Disposal sites were remote, and the evidence available in the early 1970s lacked the forensic possibilities that DNA analysis would later provide. The killer remained free, and publicly, he continued behaving as though he were merely another Santa Cruz resident following the alarming news. On September 14, 1972, 15-year-old Aiko Ku missed her bus while traveling to a dance class. She decided to hitchhike. Kemper encountered her and offered her a ride. Once again, he drove away from the expected route and into an isolated area. Aiko was killed, and her body was later abandoned. She was not a university student, despite the nickname later attached to the case. She was a 15-year-old high school student trying to reach a class. Her age is important because the phrase co-ed killer can create a misleading image of anonymous adult students. Aiko was a child, and the 5 college students were individual young women with families, friendships, plans, and futures unrelated to the man who murdered them. By the end of 1972, Kemper had killed 3 young women without becoming a suspect. Even more remarkably, his juvenile record was reportedly cleared late that year after psychiatric assessments concluded that he was no longer considered dangerous. The authorities reviewing his past did not know that he had already resumed killing. On January 7, 1973, Kemper was driving near Cabrillo College when he encountered 18-year-old Cynthia Shaw, known as Cindy. She entered his vehicle. Kemper drove her to an isolated location and killed her with a firearm. He then brought her body to the Aptos residence he shared with his mother. The house was not an abandoned building hidden from the community. It was an ordinary home in a residential setting. Kemper concealed what he had done while continuing his daily life. After dismembering Cindy's body, he disposed of most of her remains near the coast. Her head was concealed in the garden outside his mother's home, where it would remain until after his confession. Parts of Cindy's remains were recovered in the weeks following her disappearance. Investigators now knew that another young woman had been murdered, but the discovery still did not reveal who had picked her up. The region's murder investigations were becoming increasingly confused. Herbert Mullen was killing victims of different ages and backgrounds in the same county. His methods and motives differed from Kemper's, but investigators did not yet understand that two separate serial offenders were operating in overlapping areas. When Mullen was arrested in February 1973, police could finally explain a number of Santa Cruz County murders. But the disappearances of young female hitchhikers did not end with his arrest. On February 5, 1973, Kemper drove onto the University of California, Santa Cruz campus. His mother's connection to the university allowed him to display a campus parking sticker. To a student looking for transportation, the sticker suggested that the driver belonged there. 23-year-old Rosalind Thorpe accepted a ride. Soon afterward, 20-year-old Alice Liu also entered the car. Neither young woman reached her destination. Kemper killed them and transported their bodies away from the campus. Their remains were later discovered near the coast. The recovery occurred at a particularly chaotic moment. Herbert Mullen had just been arrested, and investigators were still sorting through his victims and confessions. The appearance of Rosalind and Alice's remains proved that not every disappearance could be attributed to the man already in custody. Someone else was still free. Kemper understood this. He listened to officers discuss the investigations. He followed newspaper reports. According to later accounts, he even contacted a detective working on the case without revealing his responsibility. There was a disturbing imbalance between what police knew about him and what he knew about them. The officers saw a talkative civilian. Kemper knew their theories, their frustrations, and the gaps in their evidence. One reason the case continues to disturb people is the contrast between Kemper's crimes and his public conduct. He was not constantly agitated in public. He was not openly threatening everyone he met. He could be patient, polite, humorous, and unusually articulate. Those traits were not evidence that he was harmless. They were part of what allowed him to avoid suspicion. His height could initially make passengers cautious, but his calm manner could reduce their concern. His knowledge of police culture made him appear supportive of law enforcement. His willingness to discuss himself gave people the impression that he was open rather than secretive. He was also capable of separating different parts of his life. At home, he had frequent confrontations with his mother. Around officers, he behaved like an admiring companion. With hitchhikers, he presented himself as a helpful stranger. Each version concealed the others. By March 1973, Kemper had killed 6 young women, yet no arrest appeared imminent. Then his violence turned directly toward the person he had repeatedly blamed for his anger, his mother. During the early hours of April 21, 1973, Kemper returned to the Aptos home after his mother had gone to sleep. He entered her bedroom and killed her. He later mutilated her body and attempted to destroy or conceal evidence. His treatment of her remains reflected years of rage and obsession, but his later explanations must be approached cautiously. They came from the offender himself and were often shaped to present a psychological narrative in which his mother became responsible for his choices. Clarnell may have had a difficult and damaging relationship with her son. She did not cause him to murder 8 people. Kemper made those decisions. After killing his mother, Kemper contacted her friend, Sally Hallett. He told Sally that Clarnell wanted her to come to the house. When Sally arrived, Kemper killed her as well and concealed her body inside the residence. Sally was not part of the long conflict between Kemper and his mother. She had come to visit someone she trusted. Her death showed that even after what Kemper later portrayed as the central act of his violence, he was still prepared to kill another person to protect himself or complete his plan. He then left Santa Cruz. Kemper drove across several states, eventually reaching Pueblo, Colorado. At first, he waited for news reports about the discovery of the bodies in Aptos. None appeared. The silence created an unexpected problem for him. If no one knew his mother was dead, the police were not searching for him. He could have continued traveling. Instead, he telephoned Santa Cruz police and confessed. This decision has sometimes been described as surrender, remorse, or exhaustion. The precise motive remains known only through Kemper's own accounts, which changed in emphasis over time. What is certain is that he did not surrender before killing Sally Hallett. He did not approach police during the months when Marianne, Anita, Aiko, Cindy, Rosalind, or Alice might still have been listed as missing. He called only after 8 people had been killed during the 1972-1973 series, and after he had placed considerable distance between himself and Santa Cruz. When the first officer failed to take the confession seriously, Kemper called again and insisted on speaking with someone who knew him. The familiarity that had helped protect him now made his confession difficult to believe. Once officers understood that he was serious, Colorado police took him into custody. Santa Cruz investigators traveled to question him. Kemper gave extensive descriptions of the murders and led authorities toward evidence and disposal locations. Police searched the Aptos home and found Sally Hallett's body. They also recovered evidence connected to Clarnell Strandberg and Cynthia Schall. The missing person cases could finally be connected to one offender: Marianne Pesce, Anita Luchessa, Aiko Koo, Cynthia Schall, Rosalind Thorpe, Alice Liu, Clarnell Strandberg, Sally Hallett. 8 victims whose cases had appeared scattered across different places and months were now part of a single prosecution. Kemper was charged with 8 counts of first-degree murder. The prosecution did not face the usual problem of proving the identity of an unknown offender. Kemper had confessed in detail, and physical evidence supported important parts of his statements. The central legal dispute became his mental condition. His defense entered a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity. That plea did not mean the defense claimed the killings had not occurred. It meant the jury would have to decide whether Kemper met California's legal definition of insanity at the time of the crimes. Legal insanity is narrower than simply having serious psychological abnormalities. A defendant could be profoundly disturbed and still be considered legally responsible if he understood the nature of his actions and knew they were wrong. Kemper's ability to plan, conceal evidence, select isolated locations, alter his behavior around different people, and monitor the police investigation became central to the prosecution's argument. 3 court-appointed psychiatrists concluded that he was legally sane. The trial began in Santa Cruz in October 1973. Kemper testified in his own defense. He described a divided internal life and argued that his actions could only have come from an abnormal mind. The prosecution did not need to prove that he was psychologically normal. It needed to prove that he understood what he was doing and understood that it was wrong. Evidence of concealment was especially important. Kemper had removed bodies from crime scenes, disposed of remains in distant areas, cleaned locations, watched the investigation, and avoided revealing information during casual conversations with police. Those were not the actions of someone unaware that murder was forbidden. They were the actions of someone trying not to be caught. On November 8, 1973, after approximately 5 hours of deliberation, the jury found Edmund Kemper legally sane and guilty of all 8 counts of first-degree murder. Archival television footage from the period shows him being escorted through the Santa Cruz court system in restraints, no longer the familiar civilian who had socialized around local officers. Kemper asked to receive the death penalty. However, California's capital punishment laws were undergoing major constitutional changes. The California Supreme Court had invalidated the state's death penalty in February 1972, and the legal framework for capital cases remained unsettled during Kemper's prosecution. He was sentenced to concurrent terms of 7 years to life for each of the 8 murders and transferred to the California Medical Facility in Vacaville. The concurrent structure meant that he would eventually become eligible for parole consideration. Eligibility did not mean release. It meant a parole board would periodically decide whether he remained a danger to the public. In prison, Kemper became known for cooperative institutional behavior. He participated in a program recording books for people who were blind or had difficulty reading printed material. That work has sometimes been used in popular retellings to create a contrast between his crimes and his prison conduct. But institutional cooperation does not erase a conviction. Nor does the calm voice used to record a book change the reason he remained imprisoned. Parole boards repeatedly rejected his release. At a July 9, 2024 hearing, the California Board of Parole Hearings denied parole for another 7 years. The official result listed his next period of reconsideration accordingly. More than half a century after the murders, Kemper remained inside the California prison system. His crimes also became important to the early development of behavioral research within the FBI. Agents interviewed him and other incarcerated offenders while attempting to understand patterns of serial violence. Those interviews influenced later profiling research, but they created another risk. The killer's explanations could become more famous than the lives of the people he murdered. Kemper was intelligent and articulate. That did not make every interpretation he offered reliable. He had reasons to manipulate how others understood him, to shift responsibility toward his childhood, and to turn his crimes into a story centered on his personality. A responsible account must keep returning to the victims. The phrase co-ed killer was memorable enough for newspapers and television. It was also incomplete. Marianne Pesce and Anita Lucchesa were friends traveling together. Aiko Ku was a 15-year-old student trying to reach a dance class. Cynthia Shaw was an 18-year-old college student. Rosalind Thorpe and Alice Liu were young women leaving a university campus. Sally Hallett was responding to a message from a friend. Clarnell Strandberg was Kemper's mother, but she was not responsible for the murders he chose to commit. And before all of them, Maud and Edmund Kemper Sr. had been killed by the grandson placed in their home. 10 people died across 2 periods of violence. 8 of those murders produced the 1973 conviction. The Kemper case was legally solved. The offender confessed. Evidence supported the confession. A jury found him sane and guilty. He received life sentences and has repeatedly been denied parole. But another question was never resolved so neatly. How should institutions judge danger when the person being evaluated understands exactly what the evaluators want to see? Kemper behaved well enough in a hospital to be released. He spoke well enough to appear reasonable. He understood police officers well enough to remain near them without exposing himself. He appeared helpful enough for young women to enter his car. His calmness was not the opposite of danger. It was one of the tools that concealed it. And that may be the most unsettling lesson of the co-ed killer case. Sometimes the person hiding a terrible secret does not look frightened, unstable, or out of control. Sometimes he is the calm man sitting nearby, listening as everyone else tries to find him.